With Germany and Britain at war, the conspirators can no longer hope for any help from London. They must act alone. Now they look for ways to assassinate Hitler. They keep alive an intricate plan to set up an alternative government. In July of 1944, they finally get a chance to put it into motion. At a briefing hut at Hitler's headquarters in East Prussia, a bomb is placed under a table near Hitler's feet. It explodes, but Hitler miraculously escapes. That afternoon, as a mildly injured Hitler greets Mussolini's train, the Gestapo begins to search for the conspirators. General Ludwig Beck is detained in Berlin late that night. Rather than face a firing squad, he shoots himself. Hundreds more are rounded up and arrested, including Karl Goerdeler, who manages to hide from the Gestapo for 3 weeks.
1 million was promised for that person who would find my father. 1 million, a very high sum in that time.
He was noticed by someone in a railway station. Then he was arrested on the 12th of August, 1944. The members of his family were all arrested, and his children were arrested and held until the end of the war.
Goerdeler is tortured by the Gestapo. Then led before a Nazi court for a humiliating show trial.
Der Totalität der Zuständigkeit des Generalstabsrechts.
Aha, also Vorsicht, also, und werden Sie hier nicht unverschämt. Mit Ihnen werden wir fertig. Unfassbar. Jemand privat.
Its outcome is never in question. Goerdeler is sentenced to be hanged.
I only can tell you how I got to know that, because my mother and me, we were in a cell in a prison in Leipzig where we had lived, and the door of the cell was opened, and a newspaper was thrown to us. You have to read it. And I only saw the headline, Goerdeler condemned to death. And it was so terrible for me and my mother in this little cell to get this, that I banged at the door of the cell and said, "Take it out, I can't see it." And they opened, and whispering behind the door, and then they opened it again, "You have to read it." So we knew that we wouldn't see my father again.
Ewald von Kleist is also tried for treason after the letter Churchill had given him in 1938 is discovered in a Gestapo search. In court, Kleist freely admits the charges against him.
Yes, I committed high treason at all times, he said. And he always felt that this high treason was justified because he believed that the fight against Hitler was a God-given command and that God would be his judge. There is no German opponent who made such a clear, intrepid statement in front of a court.
It took courage and it took character, and they had character. Most of the people had strong personalities to begin with, or they wouldn't have been able to be resistors, to engage in resistance. And they knew, most of them had very little illusion about their fate. They knew that they would be executed.
Ewald von Kleist is beheaded by the Nazis in the last month of the war. He is one of hundreds of conspirators to be killed. Back in London, the British Foreign Office shows no sympathy for the people who had so desperately tried to warn them in 1938 and who were now being brutally executed. A remarkable memo circulates.
The Gestapo and the SS have done us an appreciable service in removing a selection of those who would undoubtedly have posed as good Germans after the war. It is to our advantage, therefore, that the purge should continue, since the killing of Germans by Germans will save us from future embarrassments of many kinds.
Ernst von Weizsäcker and Erich and Theo Kort are posted to foreign countries in 1944 and are beyond the Gestapo's reach. They are among the few who conspired against Hitler to survive. But if they expect appreciation from the British Foreign Office once the war is over, they are in for a surprise.
The defendants in case number 11, now pending before this tribunal.
Ernst von Weizsäcker, as a former Third Reich official, is put on trial at Nuremberg in the second wave of trials beginning in 1947. Richard von Weizsäcker, then a young law student, helps in his father's defense.
The first and main point of prosecution was that my father had waged aggressive wars. And this was now so directly the opposite of his only aim why he stayed in office that that was, in the first place, rather difficult for him to understand.
Rallying to Weizsäcker's defense are Erich Kort and his brother Theo. They testify that Weizsäcker was working for peace, doing everything he could to prevent the war from starting, and then trying to stop it once it began. But the British Foreign Office officials who can back up their testimony are silent. Even Robert van Sittert, who has turned against all Germans in the last years of the war, refuses to come forward. He specifically denies knowing about any efforts by Weizsäcker or the courts to prevent war.
It was an appalling sort of display of mendacity. It really was, in the Foreign Office. If they told everything that Weizsäcker had done and everything the courts had done, how are they going to explain why they had not positively reacted to all this information and taken steps which could, in fact, have prevented the war altogether? So they were not inclined to talk.
It would have been an embarrassment to come forward and to admit that one had received correct and good advice and had not followed it. It wasn't just the persons who had not followed this advice, but it was the entire British government. On one's personal behalf, one can accept that one was wrong, but on the behalf of the nation, it's more difficult to say that the national government was wrong and had not served the nation well.
In spite of the fact that the evidence is strongly in his favor, Weizsäcker is convicted and sentenced to 5 years in prison.
One must always keep in mind those terrible crimes and atrocities of that time couldn't but invite the Allies not to believe that there had been anyone in Germany against Hitler. How they protect their position may be understandable in the interest of their country, but it was, of course, not easily to be understood by those people who, in the meantime, were indicted, well, against the historical truth.
In the British House of Commons, Winston Churchill describes the trial of Weizsäcker as a deadly error. And among the dozens of prominent people to make appeals on Weizsäcker's behalf is Lord Halifax, the former British Foreign Secretary. He has long had misgivings about his dealings with the German conspirators.
Later on, his conscience troubled him, and from time to time he would say, especially after 1938, we should have listened, there were German voices speaking, and perhaps we should have listened to them. And he felt, and I think he should have felt, that he'd failed in that respect.
After he has served 3 years in jail, Weizsäcker's case is finally reviewed by the American High Commissioner in Germany.
He wanted to order the immediate release of my father. That's what he did. But my father didn't survive very long. He was, a year later, he died.
Richard von Weizsäcker will later hold one of the most respected jobs in his country, President of the Federal Republic of Germany. Between 1939 and 1945, Adolf Hitler directed the most aggressive and brutal war in human history. 45 million people died, many of them in circumstances of extraordinary and unprecedented cruelty. In 1938, a group of courageous Germans offered a chance to remove Hitler before war began. They needed help that could have been given to them. Tragically, it wasn't.
Wie wir also heute wissen, wäre wahrscheinlich
As we know today, probably nothing would have come of the great intention to unleash a second world war if the crucial protagonist of this goal had been removed. In many ways, the entire program of National Socialism was nothing other than Hitlerism. And today's historians cannot deny that the power this man had been able to gain was unique. Everything depended on him.
In a speech he delivers after the war, Winston Churchill recalls that President Roosevelt once asked him what the war should be called. He answered, "The unnecessary war."